Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest of a series of Bogtastic webcasts from Moors for the Future Partnership. We're doing this at the moment while we're all in lockdown in order to bring the message to you about the importance of moorland and the work that we do on it, because obviously we're all unable to come out and see you in person at the moment. This is part of the More Life 2020 project, which is funded by the EU Life programme. Now, my name is Robbie Carnegie, and I'm from the communications team at Moors for the Future Partnership. And I'm here today with Katy Thorpe from the Conservation and Land Management Department. And we're going to be talking to you for the next 20 minutes or so about restoring the moors. Following that, we'll have a short question and answer session. So you can post questions on the chat bar at the side here at any time you want during our chat, and we'll try and answer as many questions as possible when we get to the end. There will also be handouts appearing as we go along. You can open those up and they'll appear in a separate tab as you go along. And we've also going to have a fun poll running. And the poll is, what type of equipment that we use in our work would you prefer to have a go in? Would you prefer to go in a digger or a helicopter? So what we're going to talk about today is the story of the work that we do on the moors and how we aim to take the moors from a degraded state of bare peat to a thriving habitat. If we could show the first picture. This is a picture of Black Hill from the start of our work, which was, I think, in around 2003 to about 15 years later. So you can see the massive changes that were brought about there. So, Katy, to start with, why is restoring the moors a really important thing to do?
Hi, Robbie. Well, apart from obviously the picture on the left looks pretty awful, and the picture on the right looks far much better. Restoring the moors is actually really important, and there's a number of reasons why we do it, which people might not always realise. So one of the first reasons is we're actually fighting climate change by restoring the moors. The moors can act as a store of carbon, so it's really, really important that it's in healthy condition, because a degraded moor can actually release carbon into the atmosphere, which isn't very good. Other reasons that we want to get the moors looking healthier, like the picture on the right of Black Hill there, as it provides a much better habitat for lots and lots of different wildlife, plants. So the biodiversity aspect is huge, being from degraded with virtually no plants, no wildlife, to becoming really, really rich and being home to some of the most some of the red list bird species in the UK. Also fighting against flooding as well, and improving our water quality. There are other reasons why we want to keep the moors in really good condition.
So, starting at the beginning of a project, if we're going to start doing work on an area, how do we decide which sites to work on?
So, if we move on to the next slide, as you've explained earlier, this is part of our More Life 2020 project, and this project is actually 100% funded through the EU Life programme. So we go through a process of looking at areas where we might want to do some work on the moors to try and restore the blanket bog to better condition. So the More Life 2020 project is just about restoring blanket bog, but sometimes we have some money awarded to us to do a specific aspect of our work. So some of the DEFRA funded projects that we work on are specifically about storing carbon. So that's more just funding bare peat restoration. And other projects which might be funded by Natural England, one that we have running at the moment is all about gully blocking and re-wetting the moors to improve biodiversity.
So, having got the funding in place, how do we go about finding the areas to work on?
So we tend to look for the worst areas using aerial imagery. And if we move on to the next slide, we can see an aerial image. So this is taken um, from the air, and it's actually Kinder Scout. So the green areas that you can see are covered in vegetation, but the darker kind of browny black areas, that's actually all bare peat where there's no vegetation growing at all. So one of the ways that we try and estimate where to work and how much work there is to do is by looking at this aerial imagery. And on the next slide, you can see that I've mapped all the bare peat. And once I've gone through this process, we can calculate the area that needs treating. So aerial imagery, even using Google Earth, it's a really, really invaluable tool to us to find the areas that we work on. But we also use satellite imagery as well. That helps us to map the watercourses. So it's not all about restoring bare peat. We need to re-wet the moors as well. So we use satellite imagery, like on the next image. You can see that it's still overlaid on the aerial photograph, but I use the satellite image to map the gullies, which are water channels. And then I can measure the length of the gullies and find out how many blocks we might need to restore that area.
So obviously this is the kind of quite high-tech element of it, but I guess there's also still a use for putting people down on the ground itself to check it out.
Yeah, and that's one of the best parts about my job as well, is actually getting out onto the moors. So in this photo, you can see Molly, who was on the webcast last week, and this is last summer, I think. We had a really, really wet week up on Ilkley Moor doing some surveys. I think it rained nearly every day. But here in this photo, Molly is looking at some bare peat, which I think is probably been caused by footfall erosion around a footpath. But we're looking at that area to try and decide how we can make it better and less boggy.
So having sort of established which areas we need to work on, do we need to get permission to do that work?
Yes, there's lots and lots of different permissions that we need to do this work. I think on some of my sites that I work on up above Hebden Bridge at the moment this year, I've been speaking to over 32 different people to get permission. So these are they range from just local people who have an interest in the moor, such as the landowner, the gamekeepers, the farmers. But there's also statutory permissions that we need to get as well. All the sites that we work on are sites of special scientific interest, so we need to get consent from Natural England to do the work as well.
And sometimes archaeology as well, does that come into it?
Yeah, there's a whole range of people that we consult with, archaeologists being one of them. It's really, really important that we find out where any existing archaeology is on site so that we can avoid it. Other people that we talk to, ecologists, we might need to know about any particularly important species that are up on the moors that we don't want to disturb at particular times of the year. And local councils, national parks, everybody needs to be consulted in this process.
So once the plan's in place, how do we go about vegetating the bare peat, like the image that's on the next slide?
Yeah, so obviously we want to get that bare peat covered in vegetation again. And you can see it's particularly bad this site. I think this photo is taken on a site that had been damaged by fire, and it was also taken during the summer of 2018 as well. So it was really, really dry, and you can see the cracks in the peat that have opened up. And if we don't do something about this, the peat just continues to erode away, and those cracks can get bigger. So to revegetate that bare peat and get it covered over, if we move on to the next slide, I can show you some pictures of how we do it. So in the top left-hand corner there, we've got a tractor and some white bags. So the first step to get stuff growing on the bare peat again is to actually cover it over and protect it from the elements. So a lot of erosion is just simply caused by the wind and the rain. So we do that by, we find another moor that's got an excess of heather, and we cut that heather from the other moor, and we actually transport it to the areas of bare peat. The scale that we're working on, we need a helicopter to do that. The areas are really, really inaccessible, and the only way to get the bags up there fast is by helicopter. So once the bags of brash are up on the hill, we have teams of contractors who go out and spread the brash. And they're spreading it kind of almost like you would compost on your garden, getting a nice even coverage over the bare peat. And it's really, really important that we get this coverage, because like I said before, it kind of provides a nice protective layer over the bare peat to stop it being eroded away.
So roughly how much, what sort of area does one of those bags of brash cover?
So one bag of brash tends to cover a 7 by 7 meter square, but it's really, really difficult to kind of say that that's exact, because the moor's never flat, and there's never a 7 by 7 meter square that's perfectly bare peat. So it's really hard to kind of judge actually how much material we need up there and how many bags of heather brash we need. You can see on the photo on the bottom left hand corner there, the sort of lighter brown bits, that's where the heather brash has been spread. And you can see some in the distance as well, but there's still a big black bit left, and I suspect that's probably because we used all the brash in that area and we actually need to fly some more in. So that happens quite often, really, is that we find that we do need more materials on site.
So the picture in the middle of the screen with the helicopter with the kind of contraption underneath it, what's that doing?
Yeah, so the heather that we bring onto site does bring some heather seed, but heather grows really, really slowly, and we actually want a different kind of mix of seeds in with that heather as well. So the helicopter in the image there is actually carrying a seed applicator, and we apply seed from the air. It's a mixture of different grasses in the seed, and these grasses act as what we call a nurse crop. So they're designed to survive for about 5 years. In the meantime, the heather and the other dwarf shrubs such as bilberry, crowberry, cross-leaved heath, they're growing very, very slowly, but because the nurse crop has stabilized the peat and kind of developed a root mass, it really helps the other plants to grow alongside it.
Because we'll also be spreading lime as well, won't we?
Yeah, so the pH up on the moors is really, really acidic. It can be as acidic as lemon juice in some instances. So we apply some lime as well, and that helps increase the pH to something suitable that the grasses can actually start to grow in.
Right. So, I mean, I mean, what's I think really clear about this is that although it's a kind of natural process, it has to have, on the scale that we're working on, we're having to do quite something quite industrial almost to be able to do it. I mean, one of the other areas, I guess, is also the gullies that have formed in some places on the moors because of erosion or because they were cut out by man at some point in the past. How do we go about sort of stopping those from draining the moors?
Yeah, so we're looking again at our initial picture with the bare peat, all those cracks. You can see that even after we've applied the brash and the lime and seed, the cracks are actually still there. And these can still continue to erode. On the next slide, this is a year on, and you can see that the grasses are starting to grow, but there's still obviously a lot of work to be done to get the moor into better condition and looking like blanket bog. So looking at the next slide, these are some of the different types of um, blocks or dams that we put into the gullies. And by blocking the gullies, what we're trying to do is raise the water table and keep them more wetter for longer. So in the top left hand corner, we've got some peat dams there. They're the cheapest and probably the easiest types of dams that we make. So they're the ones that the digger uses. The digger creates. And on the bottom left hand corner, that's a timber dam. So that's just made from wood. Again, fairly easy to make. And those two dams hold the most water, which is really great for wading birds. It creates nice pools, nice habitats for insects as well. On the right hand side of the screen, we've got some heather bale dams at the top and some stone dams at the bottom. Now, those two types of dams are better at trapping sediment, so that they go hand in hand with the bare peat revegetation process in stabilising the, the peat, stopping it running off the hill, and creating a kind of a nice damp environment for other plants to grow in.
I guess in some places on the moors, though, there aren't really enough um, range of species there to kind of create a kind of healthy environment. What do we do about that?
So if we look at the next slide, one of the most important steps that we actually undergo is planting sphagnum moss. On the moors in the Peak District and the South Pennines, sphagnum has been virtually absent for many, many years, mainly due to industrial pollution from the big cities that we're surrounded by. So sphagnum is really, really important on the moors because it's sort of the building block of a healthy blanket bog, and it builds peat over time. So it's a big job to get this back into the Peak District and the South Pennines. And we do that by actually we import tiny sphagnum plants. They're about the size of a 50p piece, and they're actually planted into the areas that we've restored. And over time, that kind of small 50p piece plant actually grows to something more like a dinner plate size in about 5 years. It's even though it's such a crucial step in our restoration, it's actually one of the easiest jobs that we do. Each person can plant about 1,200 plugs per day, and we're planting about 1.3 million of these plants per year.
So when you say each person will plant those, who's doing that work? Is it members of the Moors for the Future team or volunteers, or who would be doing that?
So the scale that we're working on means that we need to employ specialist contractors to do the work. to plant 1.3 million plugs, that's actually about 1,000 days work. So it would be impossible for the Moors for Future team to do it themselves. We do have a lot of volunteers that do the work as well, coming from organisations such as the National Trust and the RSPB. And the volunteers are out there planting sphagnum all through the winter, come rain or shine, as long as it's not frosty or snowing, they're out there.
Because also the other thing that we sometimes have to do is, as well as putting some plants in, we're having to take some things out as well, aren't we?
Yeah, sometimes there can become an overdominance of one type of vegetation. And if we look at the next slide, we've got some, on the left-hand side, we've got a type of grass called Molinia, which is purple moorgrass. You might have heard of it. And on the right-hand side, there's a dominance of heather there. So what we want to try and do is kind of increase the diversity of these areas so that it's just not one species growing. And you can see in the pictures that we're doing that by actually mowing these areas, and then we'll go in and plant different species afterwards, whether that be sphagnum or other dwarf shrubs.
Great. That's, I mean, obviously, as we say, it is something where we can't do it all on our own, and we do need sort of, expert help from others with that. I think we've got another picture to go with that. Yeah. So it looks like this is you in various different situations there, Katy.
Yeah, so I forgot to say about the last picture as well, and that you can see the one on the top right there. The machine that we're using to do the mowing is actually a remote control, and this is much safer than using a sort of traditional tractor or ride-on mowing machine. So the remote control machine can actually operate on really steep slopes really safely because we can stand well out of the way. And this is one of the only bits of equipment that Moors for Future own ourselves. And yeah, it's great fun to drive. It's like driving a remote control toy car. And yeah, the other pictures there you can see really fond memories of mine of being out on the moors, getting to ride in a helicopter every now and again with my colleagues as well.
Well, I'm just looking at the results of the poll that we did earlier, and unsurprisingly, 70% of the people who answered said that they would prefer to have a go in the helicopter than have a go on a digger. So there we go. So I think there's a fairly clear sort of popularity there for the for the helicopter. So I think we've certainly had a great sort of overview there of the work that we're doing to restore the moors. So we're just going to move on to some of the questions now. We're also going to do another little poll at the same time, because obviously today was really just a sort of, we could only really sort of go do a bit of a surface sort of thing of the whole area of what we do in terms of the restoration. And so we're going to do another poll in terms of if there's any particular areas that people might like to get a bit more detail on. So when that pops up in a minute. So would you be more interested, for example, in knowing more about gully and grit blocking, bare peat restoration, or planting and the role of sphagnum moss? So we'll have a look at that when we get towards the end of the thing now. But just having a look through the questions that we've had. Linda asks, how do we collect the heather brash?
So it's collected by machine, and the contractors tend to have something like a forage harvester, which you might see out in the arable fields in the summer collecting silage. So it's kind of a mower and collector all in one.
Okay, and then obviously then we move it with the helicopters to the place where we need to spread it.
Yeah, sorry, it's just really started throwing it down at my house, and finding it hard.
I wasn't sure if it was the line or that, but well, yeah, I can sort of see now. Yes, the Graham asks the question: the acidity when we put the line down, will the acidity balance itself out naturally eventually? Or are we losing you there, Katy?
Yes, it does. Yeah. The lime acts for about. Oh, sorry. Let me move. Is that
We're on the
better?
move here.
Sorry about
This is the
that.
excitement of a live broadcast.
Actually, glad it's raining as well because it's been so
Yeah,
dry for so long. Um, it's I'm actually really happy it's rain now. It's reducing the fire risk on the moors.
excellent, excellent. Um, Anne asks the question: what species of sphagnum do we typically use for in the plugs?
So we actually use a mix of different species because we're not planting into optimal conditions. The moors are very degraded in the Peak District and South Pennines. So we go for a mix of different species that will thrive in whatever conditions we plant them into. So they're a mix of kind of the species that might like more flushy areas, so like Fimbriatum and Phalax. We've also got some of the sort of bog specialist species in there, such as Papilosum, Capivolium, Magellanicum. So yeah, but we can send more detail on that if you'd like it.
We have a question here on a similar sort of thing from Ian, who says, do you have any experience of using hydroseeding for revegetation? And he also asks, is frost heave an issue?
Um, so yeah, hydroseeding is something that we've looked at, but we've not really trialed it extensively. We are working across hundreds and sometimes thousands of hectares, and we're always looking for ways that we can do it better, more cost effectively, and more easily as well. So yeah, we're always open to new ideas. Frost heave, yes, sometimes. Not so much planting the sphagnum plugs, but where if we plant other plants such as cotton grass, um, heather, cross-leaved heath, bilberry, that's sometimes susceptible to frost heave. But we try and get it planted after the last frost, which is sometimes quite a challenge.
Because one of the things with the work that we do, isn't it, is that our main work season tends to be across the winter. So that's always one of the, because we have to finish in time for the breeding bird season to start. So that's always a bit of a balancing act. The time when probably it's the worst time for us to be out there is the time when we're doing most of the work.
Yeah, that's right. Our sort of works window is from the beginning of August through to the end of March. So we don't actually do any work from April to August when the weather tends to be nicest. And that's because there's birds that nest on the ground on the moors. So it's really important that we don't disturb them.
Got a question from Selena asking who our partners are.
So our partners are some of the water companies. We've got Yorkshire Water, Severn Trent, United Utilities. We've also got the National Trust, the RSPB, and Natural England and the Environment Agency.
Yeah.
Sorry if I forgot anybody.
And we've got I think we've just got time for one more question now, which was from Graham and Judy, who say that they got lost in P tags on Bleaklow and Kinder Scout over 50 years ago. Are the 6 foot deep gullies all gone now?
No, we wish they were, but it's a really really slow process. We're sort of building blocks over time, I suppose, and trying to fill in some of the smaller gullies. But the larger ones, you might find if you went up there now, they'd be green gullies rather than black ones. So we are making steps in the right direction. But yeah, some of those big ones on Bleaklow and Kinder, I'm not sure we'll ever be able to get rid of those.
Great. Okay. Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time now. I have got a reminder here from David, who says one of the partners we didn't mention was the Peak District National Park Authority. So we must make sure that we mention them. So I'm afraid we're going to have to wind up now. If we didn't get to your question, we'll try and get back to you on on the question thing on here or on social media. So we will try and answer any questions we didn't get a chance to do today, but our time is now running out. Also, go if you want to check in on our website at any point, we'll get a lot more information there. Just to check on the poll that we ran, it looks at the moment the bare peat restoration is the most popular one at 43%. So when next time we do a conservation one of these, that will definitely be something that we'll be looking to cover. So that's it for today. For those of you who didn't catch the beginning of this particular talk, it'll be recorded and it'll be available on our website, on our virtual Bogtastic van page, and also on YouTube. Next week we'll be back here again at the same time, where we'll be with Research and Monitoring's Tom Spencer, who will be virtually on Kinder Scout and explaining how we evidence the effectiveness of our work there and how the work is both testing and exhilarating. But for now, from Katy and myself, thank you very much for tuning in. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you again next week. Thank you.